Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition. Here in the Situation Room, I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello, and we certainly have another situation.
The conflict between Israel and Iran is now in its 7th day, and the violence is escalating.
President Trump said today that he will temporarily hold off on deciding whether the U.S. would get involved.
But I'll let you know in about 2 weeks.
As Donald Trump makes the biggest decision of his second term, we'll look back to where his controversial, improbable, unpredictable political career began 10 years ago this week, at the top of that golden escalator.
We're going to speak to his former advisor, Sam Nunberg. Also, joining us to look at what's going on in the Middle East is former Obama National Security Advisor Mara Rudman. But first...
Will he or won't he? Not for the first time, Donald Trump has the world guessing. And it seems like right now, even he doesn't know whether the United States will join the Israeli conflict with Iran.
I have ideas as to what to do, but I haven't made a final. I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due, because things change. I mean, especially with war. Things change with war. It can go from one extreme to the other. War is very bad.
Overnight, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt gave this update.
I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks." That's a quote directly from the president for all of you today.
So, is Donald Trump giving peace a chance or just getting his ducks in a row to unleash the world's biggest conventional bomb against Iran's deep underground nuclear facility at Fordow? And what other considerations are there, political as well as diplomatic and military? The most anti-war Republican president campaigned on a promise to avoid World War III, but now he risks starting it. Or maybe this is what prevention looks like, Chaz.
Yeah, look, you say he's known as anti-war, and I understand why you say that. I mean, like you said, he campaigned saying this kind of stuff.
I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine settled, and I will be the only one that can make this statement. I will prevent World War III from happening. You're very close to World War III.
But remember what he was talking about there. He was talking about the Ukraine war, where he's had a peculiar kind of sympathy for Russia there. So he wasn't necessarily expressing support for peace so much as...
different World War III.
Yeah, it was a Russian victory, essentially. When he was president, look at what he did. He increased the number of drone strikes markedly. He took out the Iranian commander Soleimani with an airstrike as well. The guy is no peacenik. He's just... He doesn't mind aggression on his terms.
Right.
Also, he's convinced himself that intervention doesn't necessarily involve a full war anyway. The White House told Politico that all they might do is just a few tactical strikes against specific nuclear facilities without getting pulled into an extended war. It's not regime change, they said, it's taking out nukes. Of course, the question is how Iran would react to America repeatedly bombing them. Apparently, they've already prepared missiles and other military equipment for strikes on American bases if Trump does enter the fray. The Houthis, of course, in Yemen would then start shooting at US ships again. Shiite militias would start attacking US troops in Iraq and Syria. Iran could mine the Strait of Hormuz. It just goes on and on. There'd be an inevitable response from America, of course, and then tit-tat, before you know it, America's neck deep in war. Besides, Trump is increasingly talking like he's already in the war, like America's Israel or something.
War is very complex. A lot of bad things can happen. A lot of turns are made. So I don't know. I wouldn't say that we won anything yet. I would say that we sure as hell made a lot of progress.
There's a whole lot of we there, isn't there? And many of Trump's supporters seem happy to go along with the ride, I reckon. For example, Fox News political commentator Molly Hemingway. Last week, she tweeted about how a decision to militarily escalate would be seen as an unforgivable betrayal by millions of American voters. It would cost him real polling support that would be permanent, and it would be a powerful gift to his political enemies who still seek to destroy him and the movement he leads. Yet as soon as Trump hinted that he would escalate, well, she suddenly had a change of heart.
He's earned a bit of credibility because of how he's handled so many conflicts in the past, and so I think that's why so many Americans are feeling okay about it, though.
Yeah, they're okay with it. You know, as Trump says, America first means many great things, including the fact that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. It seems like America first means whatever Trump wants it to mean, John. So let me ask you, are his supporters that easily gaslit?
I don't think it's gaslighting for his actual supporters, the voters that got Donald Trump elected. They were as attracted to Donald Trump's love of the military and a parade and patriotism and flag waving. They'd be, I'm sure, quite chuffed if he started blowing things up in Iran, as long as he doesn't get 200,000 of their sons and daughters into a decade-long quagmire. And I think it's wrong to assume that that is what Trump is looking at here. If Trump does go into Iran, yes, there could be retaliation from the Iranians, just as there was after the death of Soleimani. That was attacks on American bases in places like Iraq. Hundreds of Americans were injured. Nobody died miraculously. But that could be the kind of thing we look at. Could this end up being a naval war in the Straits of Hormuz? Iran has basically lost its missile and air force capacity. It's got no air cover over Iran itself. But the Iranian Navy is formidable. We could end up seeing a war at sea. That's where this could play out, with a lot less likely mass casualties on behalf of the United States. At the end of the day, Trump's supporters in the real world will go with him, their commander-in-chief. His supporters on podcasts and on Twitter TV shows like Tucker Carlson, they will not, because they are isolationists and have always been against this kind of conflict, and that is where they will break with Trump. I don't think Trump cares if they do.
I think you're right about his supporter base, for sure. I think that Trump has never had any ideology. He's never stood for anything but success.
Right. Yeah.
And as long as he's successful, they're cool with it, because that's what he promises. The question is, though, is he going to be successful? Because I've got to say, there are real shades of the Iraq War about this build-up for mine.
Sure.
We've got assurances that they're not looking to change the regime. They're just trying to remove the nuclear threat. We've got murky evidence emerging from intelligence agencies that Iran is rushing to a bomb. No one seems to be able to verify what this evidence is or where it comes from. Do you remember this 2002 classic?
We cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Well, they're dusting off that argument again.
If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, I think the odds are unacceptably high that we would find out with a mushroom cloud over New York City or Los Angeles or Tel Aviv in Israel.
Attaboy, Ted. After 9/11 as well, George W. Bush famously delivered this threat.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
And in 2025, they're rolling it out again.
This is good versus evil. You're either a patriotic American who's going to get behind the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, or you're not.
Just now they're yelling it. In 2003, they were going to be greeted as liberators.
There's no doubt in my mind, once these people are gone, that we will be welcomed as liberators.
And now we're hearing how, outside of Israel, the Iranian people are the biggest fans of the United States in the Middle East, but they're oppressed by a monstrous regime. And finally, back in 2002, a familiar fellow explained to us all how invading Iraq would transform the Middle East.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region.
And now, well, apparently isolationists are currently standing in the way of Trump and Netanyahu transforming the Middle East with an invasion. Sure. But then there are also some fairly important differences from the lead up to Iraq, to be fair. Like, for instance, this time around, even America's intelligence agencies aren't believing the horror stories. American intelligence has maintained for months that Iran is not trying to build a bomb. And so Israel provided US intelligence with the evidence that they'd collected. And the US officials were completely unconvinced by Israel's evidence. They said it didn't necessarily point to Iran building a bomb. So that's different. Another difference, US involvement in Iran would be incredibly unpopular. According to YouGov, polling at 16%. Whereas the Iraq War early on, believe it or not, polled at 72%, according to Gallup. Another major difference, the threat from Saddam Hussein was not caused by George W. Bush's own actions. Whereas it's pretty clear that Iran stopped installing centrifuges when they signed Obama's nuclear deal, but then they started building centrifuges again after Trump cancelled the nuclear deal in his first term, and they're really building them now. And finally, the biggest difference is that in the lead up to Iraq, Iraq hadn't happened yet, so they couldn't learn from Iraq. But you know what? Now Iraq has happened, and yet somehow, John, they seem to have not learnt a thing.
I agree with you, except for that final point. I think the lesson that Donald Trump will take away from all of this is we did fine getting rid of Saddam Hussein from Iraq and the Taliban from Afghanistan. The problem was when we tried to recreate those nations in our image, or at least as secular, moderate Middle Eastern democracies. That was never going to work. Colin Powell, back at the time of the Iraq War, used to talk about the pottery barn principle. You break it, you own it. Donald Trump, I strongly suspect, will say, you break it, not my problem. He'll break it and walk away. He doesn't want to create Iran in his image. If the Iranians want to do that, great. He's more likely to just leave it up to them to figure out, much more as America did after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I think there are more comparisons now between the Iranian regime and the end of Soviet Russia, perhaps, than to either Iraq or Afghanistan. Time will tell, but I don't anticipate that Donald Trump is going to want to go in there and spend the next 3 years of his presidency justifying the coffins coming back from Andrews Air Force Base.
I agree with the general sentiment, but I just make this point. Let's just say do a little bombing run. Trump goes, great. We've gotten rid of the nuclear bomb, except for they don't know that for a fact, do they? And then Iran's going to start rebuilding. So then they have to come back and come back and come back until that regime is toppled. And when that regime is toppled, we're in the Iraq zone. You might say Donald Trump doesn't believe in the pottery barn principle. I'm sure he doesn't. But he will be drawn in. Just like he was drawn in by ISIS, he'll be drawn in by Iran. Unless Iran's bigger.
Unless the bunker busters lead to Trump negotiating an agreement with Iran from a more powerful position. The Ayatollahs stay in control, but Trump is able to say, OK, we'll bomb you again in 6 months if you start those centrifuges spinning. We can keep doing this for as long as you like, or you can stop, because we got more bunker busters where they came from. So we'll see. Time will tell. Nobody really knows. But for more, someone who does know quite a bit, Mara Rudman. She is a former senior State Department official. She served in both the Obama and Clinton administrations in roles including Deputy Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs. Mara Rudman, welcome to Planet America's Situation Room. What do you make of President Trump's proclamation through his press secretary today that he is effectively going to make a decision within 2 weeks?
Well, I think on the positive side, I'm glad there's a little bit more time here to work out a variety of different options and scenarios. The points that concern me is just the very public telegraphing of every zig and zag that seems to be part of his thinking at this point. Maybe there's some grand strategy behind it. It's a little hard for me to see that.
Now, there are two very different nuclear activity reports coming out from Iran. You got one from the Israeli intelligence and the other from the American intelligence, and the courses of actions that those two are suggesting are very different. Which one do you think is more trustworthy?
Well, first, I have to say, since they're intelligence sources, I think by definition, what we all are hearing is what people are choosing to make public and or what people are leaking. So that applies equally to American and to Israeli intelligence. I would say with the exception of the fact that we know that the U.S. Director of National Intelligence testified back in March, which is granted a couple months ago, with a much longer timeline for Iran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon. And there has since been reporting as well that what she testified to in March remains the view of the U.S. intelligence community, though President Trump made it awkwardly clear, I was saying in a public setting, that it was not his view. We've also had members of Congress, I heard one, a senator from Oklahoma, in an interview that really, for me, even with the current political situation in the United States, I found shocking, because he all but said that he had been briefed by a foreign country, and I presume this was Israel, and that he trusted their views more than he trusted the views of his own intelligence service. And there have also been very unfair allegations about that kind of assume that there's a politicization, frankly, of either Israeli intelligence or American intelligence, which I also find troubling and also stunningly inaccurate, just based on my interactions, certainly with career intelligence folks in the United States and also to some extent in Israel.
And Mara, does effectively giving Iran 1 or 2 weeks warning of an impending American attack give them any time to prepare in a meaningful way, or ultimately is there no preparation for a bunker-busting bomb?
So I think that the types of preparations that Iran would be doing, they are likely doing anyway. In other words, you hear from their statements that they are kind of baking in the ability to strike at U.S. targets. They probably have questions about how much the United States has already been involved in helping Israel on the offensive side. Certainly what has been most publicized is the bunker buster bomb ability that the United States has and the planes that would fly it in. But there are any number of other ways that we might also be assisting Israel. And so Iran is likely baking that into their calculations, both in terms of what missiles they reserve and reporting today on the potential activity that they could put in place in the Straits of Hormuz that would really significantly slow international shipping and have tremendous impact on global oil prices. So there are a number of things that Iran is probably planning on, has available to them. And it would just be a question of the timeline on when they execute on those fronts in terms of the United States getting that much more directly and publicly involved in helping Israel.
Mara, is it possible to just run a few bombing raids over the Fordow nuclear facility and that's it, without America being fully dragged into the war?
That is America being fully dragged into the war. When the United States has a unique ability to penetrate the very significant enrichment activities that are going on at Fordow and that Fordow is capable of, it would be foolish to expect, I would say, that there's kind of a surgical strike and then the United States is out of it. Once you're in, you're in. I mean, the old expression of in for a dime, in for a dollar, this is in for a lot more than that. And that is one of the reasons it's such a consequential decision, and one that, listen, I can appreciate President Trump's serious contemplation of what is involved. I just don't appreciate his very public commentary on his internal considerations.
Mara, if the United States were to hold back and not deploy their bunker-busting bombs, of course, Israel does have, we all assume, another option. They have nuclear weapons of their own. Is there a scenario where you could see Israel using their nuclear weapons against the Iranian nuclear program?
The challenge writ large for all actors involved is how quickly difficult, serious as the current strikes and counterstrikes have been, how quickly this can spiral to essentially a fully regional and global conflagration. And so the scenario that you suggest in terms of nuclear weapons being used would be part of that. And it's also a significant challenge, again, for all actors, but we see it very directly with Israel and with Iran. They're concerned about wanting to fully demolish the other actor in one way or another, can lead to kind of virtually suicidal implications. And I mentioned earlier the Straits of Hormuz, right? And Iran's ability to lay bombs with its navy that has been largely untouched thus far, to lay bombs in the Straits of Hormuz and fully jeopardize, paralyze international shipping. That also would significantly traumatize an already traumatized Iranian economy. So for both actors, the extreme to get at the other actor would put its own country in that much more significant peril, and the future of its country. in that much more significant peril. I think it is more likely with Israel that they would use a variety of non-nuclear means that are at their disposal, even though they don't have the bunker busters that the United States has, and that's been made quite public at this point. Repeated runs at Fordo or other places to weaken its ability, the possibility of commando raids there, cyber actions, actions that would cut off electricity to Fordo. There may be various routes that Israel has available short of what the United States might have that would over time allow them to accomplish their goals. If their goals are in fact Iran's inability to produce a nuclear weapon, or if it is, for example, to severely slow Iran's ability to produce a nuclear weapon, if their goal is regime change, then all bets are off, because at least in the experience of the United States, and I'd say many other countries around the world, having that goal for another country is very far from actually the success rate on achieving that goal, and having, even if the regime falls, having what comes next be better than what was there before. Not a great track record on that.
Finally, Mara, is there any world in which the current Iranian regime falls and America does not find itself having to police the resulting chaos for a decade?
I'm not sure. And the reason I say I'm not sure is I am hard-pressed to understand, again, how the current U.S. administration makes decisions and what they see as what is critical for defending and protecting the security of American citizens. And so whether they see that, in the words of the late Colin Powell, Secretary of State, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that if you broke it, you own it. In other words, if you've been directly involved, you're going to end up having to be there to fix stuff, or to try to fix stuff. I'm not sure that those will be the views of this current White House.
Mara Rudman, thank you for joining us in Planet America's Situation Room.
Thank you.
Now, we spoke before about the comparisons to the Iraq War, and one huge difference between now and the Iraq War is George W. Bush sought congressional approval for the Iraq War, and Trump isn't even trying to get congressional approval for this time round. That could be a bit of an issue though, John. You see, the Constitution is pretty clear about how this works. Article 1, Section 8 says only Congress has the power to declare war. Now, that might sound odd to you because you might not recall Congress ever actually declaring war before. It's been a while, but there is a law on the books called the War Powers Act that allows the president to have some temporary war-making powers. The president can enter America into hostilities if war has already been declared, or if Congress passes a law allowing the president to do that, or if there's a national emergency created by America or one of its possessions, or the army being attacked. Now, obviously, none of those three conditions has been met so far for Iran, so no dice for Trump. In fact, not only has Trump not had a law of approval passed by Congress, but right now some congressmen are trying to do the opposite. House Republican Thomas Massey's trying to introduce a resolution with Democrat Ro Khanna to prohibit American involvement in the Iran war. He wrote, "This is not our war, and even if it were, Congress must decide such matters according to our Constitution." Tim Kaine is trying to introduce a matching bill in the Senate, and both of those resolutions are what they call privileged, which means the chambers will be forced to vote on them as soon as next week. Now, it's true that previous presidents have bent this law, if not broken it. Obama argued Bush-era war authorizations from 2001 covered drone strikes in Yemen somehow. And Bill Clinton conducted missile strikes in Sudan and Afghanistan in 1998 without explicit congressional approval as well. So there is that. Some people also argue that Trump doesn't need authorization for just a single strike on a nuclear lab. Ted Cruz said a single bombing run historically has not been understood to require congressional authorization. whereas if you're going to engage in continued warfare, that would require a congressional vote. Finally, some argue that since Iran aided and abetted al-Qaeda, Trump can use the existing congressional authorization of use of military force against al-Qaeda from 2002. They also say since Iran has been a major sponsor of terrorism and Iran has been responsible for the deaths of so many American young men and women through their proxies in Yemen and Gaza, also through their own bombing, attacking Iran is kind of like in self-defense. Kind of? What do you reckon, John? Do any of these arguments hold water, or is this provision in the Constitution effectively dead these days?
Yeah, I think it is, and history says as well, things like the Gulf of Tonkin resolution that led to America's commitment to Vietnam. Look, they will find a way to justify a declaration of war. Whether Congress is involved or not, a lot of people in Congress really don't want to get into an Iraq situation where they have a vote on the record saying they supported this war. They're quite happy to go, sure, we'll just divest those powers to the president for a bit.
Yeah. No, I feel like most of Congress would not want to go on the record with saying no. They just don't have the guts. So they'll find a way.
Yeah, I suspect they will. It's hard to believe, but it is now 10 years ago this week that reality TV star and property developer Donald J. Trump made an announcement that, looking back, changed the course of history.
I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again.
As the paid-for crowd cheered, pundits couldn't decide if this was a sideshow or serious.
He's been flirting with running for president since 1988, and each time he flirted with it with a sense of just being a self-promoter. It was clear it was a publicity stunt, and it's not yet clear to me that this isn't going to be yet another publicity stunt by him.
Some media outlets even refused to assign political journalists to Trump's campaign, leaving it up to their showbiz reporters.
The real estate mogul made the big announcement Tuesday, saying America needs a businessman in office over a politician.
We need somebody that can take the brand of the United States and make it great again.
Trump, who is vying for the Republican nomination, says his personal financial status should speak volumes about what he can do. Documents released along with his speech claim Trump's net worth is nearly $9 billion.
Trump delivered a simple message based on an established image of wealth and success, but in that announcement speech, he also said something that many at the time were convinced was going to be immediately disqualifying.
Trump is enraging many people with his remarks about Mexican immigrants.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
How can you succeed when you say things like that?
Well, you can't, again, Gail, if the question is how can you become president, you can't by saying things like that.
That aged well. But looking back on it, that very first speech of Trump's amounted to a template, perhaps a manifesto for Trump. He railed against illegal immigration. He threatened to impose tariffs. He boasted endlessly of his wealth, and he criticised the stupidity and weakness of all past American leaders. And faced with a backlash over those Mexican rapist comments, Trump did not back off.
Are you concerned about alienating the Hispanic vote by saying that Mexico is not our friend and we're building a wall?
If it's good for me or bad for me, I don't think of that. I think of saying the right thing. And people have to be alerted to the fact that we are getting some really bad characters coming into this country.
Never apologising was a superpower. In that 2016 campaign, there were plenty of moments when Trump's candidacy and campaign looked like a joke, a media distraction until the serious candidate emerged, a 6-time bankrupt blowhard with silly hair and a fake tan. But he certainly was different, outrageous even, and once he got onto that debate stage up against actual politicians, he was impossible to ignore.
You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell. The big problem this country has is being politically correct.
This is a tough business to run for president.
I know. You're a tough guy, Jeb.
And we need to have a leader that is principled. You're never going to be president of the United States by insulting your way to the presidency.
Let's see. I'm at 42 and you're at 3, so far I'm doing better.
Doesn't matter.
If he hadn't inherited $200 million, you know where Donald Trump would be right now? Selling watches in Manhattan.
I have to say, he lied this time. He lied, 100%. Single biggest liar. You probably are worse than Jeb Bush. You are the single biggest liar.
And in taking it to Ted and Marco and Jeb and the media, Trump was speaking for millions of Americans frustrated with political and media elites who'd taken them into wars and economic recessions, banked their cheques and moved on. It was quite a trick, given that Trump was certainly part of that elite, even if some sneered at his new money, gold-plated gauchiness. But when Trump became the nominee of the Republican Party, most Republicans, let alone Democrats, sensed that he was barrelling towards an embarrassing defeat against Hillary Clinton. Some, like their 2012 Republican nominee Mitt Romney, went even further.
A person like Donald Trump, who has said what he said about Muslims, Mexicans, women, George Bush, John McCain, a person like that should not be the nominee of our party or be the president.
Yet, of course, somehow, through a perfect political storm, Trump won, and through several other extraordinary twists of fate, including 2 impeachments, a once-in-a-century pandemic, countless scandals and missteps, followed by the unprecedented denial of his election loss to Joe Biden in 2020, not to mention multiple criminal convictions. He was clipped by an assassin's bullet. Trump then staged perhaps the greatest political comeback in history to once again sit in the Oval Office in the White House, once again turning politics into a gripping and unsettling reality TV show with unimaginably high stakes for the whole world. Donald Trump is without question one of the most consequential political figures in American history. He was ranked as the worst ever president by scholars after his first term, but became only the second defeated president to stage a successful comeback. He is now untethered from needing to win another election, yet he still seeks approval at every turn. A populist rather than a conservative, he has remade the Republican Party of Lincoln and Reagan in his own image, appealing to America's richest and poorest alike. He's at the same moment the most dishonest and truthful politician America has seen, saying out loud what others would never say, while constantly peddling falsehoods, conspiracy theories and outright bile, petty, mean, divisive, yet able to command the fierce loyalty of his supporters as few, if any, have done before, employing the method sometimes of some of history's worst demagogues. And at the age of 79, it does seem that Donald Trump is an old man in a hurry to make money out of power and power out of money, to finally prove himself perhaps before his time is up, Chaz.
I got to say, I can't believe I'm saying this, but how young did he seem in those clips? These presidents are so old.
Yeah.
Even when they're old men, they look young when you look back at them.
Yeah, fascinating, isn't it? Well, someone who has known Donald Trump for many years now and worked with him on that 2016 campaign is Republican political consultant Sam Nunberg. Sam is credited with coming up with perhaps the most famous and effective of all of Trump's political catchphrases, "Build that wall." Like many former Trump staffers, later Sam had a falling out with Trump, and in the last presidential campaign, he went to work for Trump's rival, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Sam Nunberg spoke to me earlier from Miami, Florida. Sam Nunberg, 10 years ago, as Donald Trump came down that famous golden escalator, did you think that he was on his way to becoming president of the United States, and do you think he thought he was heading that way?
I think we both knew that he was most probably going to win the primary in the very least. When he went down that escalator, it's actually a little funny of a story. We released prepared remarks, which were only 3 pages or so, where we had hired someone to help do the planning for the choreography and to do the stage and everything like that, who had worked in other campaigns. And they, along with some others, they were hoping that he was only going to speak for 10 to 15 minutes. They used the word dignified many times, and they also didn't even want him to go down the escalator. In effect, his style and what he did that day was even outside the imagination of people who were working for him. This was something that was going to be for the history books, but it was also a political announcement that regardless of whether or not he actually won the primary or the general election, it was something that people would be talking about for 30 years or so. So he was quite aware of that. The week before, he was actually a little worried. I'd call it even stage fright, and was thinking about delaying it. This was a big challenge for somebody like him to run. He had actually a lot on the line as opposed to everybody else that he was running against. He's a private businessman. He has business interests. He has licensing deals. He has endorsements. And he's going out and running on a Republican-like, I'd say, Republican-like, L-I-K-E, Republican-like platform, which wasn't going to be popular with corporate America. So I remember, and Don Jr. tells this story as he was coming down the elevator, but he had said this to me earlier that morning. He said, I'm about to find out who my real friends are.
And Sam, the fact that throughout that 2015-2016 period, Donald Trump kept saying and doing things that shocked and outraged, whether it was John McCain is not a hero, the way that he was like a schoolyard bully, giving nicknames and teasing Jeb Bush and Little Marco and Lion Ted. Did the fact that he survived and indeed thrived through all of that say that what we thought were the rules of presidential politics really never existed, or that somehow Donald Trump was the exception and that he could break those rules with impunity where others couldn't?
I think it's a little of both. When you get to what the political writers usually say and think, if frankly their conventional wisdom, it's only conventional wisdom from the last couple cycles of elections. Things change, right? So Barack Obama was never supposed to beat Hillary Clinton, was never going to win, according to conventional thinking. I remember having this debate with then Mr. Trump, where he said that he didn't want to spend money on advertising. And I couldn't wrap my mind around, how could a campaign win without even running any commercials? And I said, everybody's going to run negative commercials against you. But he said to me, I think I know what I'm doing here, Sam. And he didn't say it like that, but I'll paraphrase it. He said, I think I know what I'm doing here. He said, but in general, he said, they're going to run a 30-second commercial against me. That's great. But I'll tell you what, the next 4 minutes, when you get to the news coverage, are going to be all about me. So what's the difference? What's the difference? And once again, so the conventional rules of politics just weren't going to, apply to him vis-a-vis that. He got so much earned media. So many people wanted to follow him. They either wanted to watch what he was doing because they adored him, or they were interested, or they hated him. But it really didn't matter, because once again, he was in a Republican primary where he had to win, I would say, a large minority, not even really a plurality. And then you had the other issue where you had never seen a candidate of all his attributes. He was a hybrid of a Ronald Reagan, a Ross Perot, a Pat Buchanan, and frankly, a Barack Obama from 2008, who ran as a populist outsider. And then he was also Donald J. Trump, somebody who had been in the American psyche, and frankly, the world psyche, at least the Western world psyche, since the 1980s.
So heading into the general election in November of 2016 against Hillary Clinton, Sam, the polls were universally bad for Donald Trump. Some had him losing in a landslide by double digits. At that point, how concerned were you? Some reports have also suggested that Donald Trump did not think that he was going to win that election in the final days.
My understanding, and I wasn't with the campaign then, of course, was that the last couple of weeks, he saw that there was something going on, that it was closing. But what a lot of people don't talk about, and one of the reasons that I thought there was a slim probability, like he asked me, what do you think my chances are of winning the primary? Or what do you think my chances are in the election? So I said, well, first of all, one thing I promise you is 100% you'll come out well out of this. And then I said, for the primary, I'll give you 75% chance. Really, a 75% chance. And I went through the numbers. And when we got to the general, I probably thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. Up until around 12 days out, I was talking with a couple people at the campaign. I was talking with Steve Bannon. I was talking with John McLaughlin. And they were telling me about the polling. So on election day, when I saw that the Florida returns, which come in very early here, when I saw those come in, and you saw that, for instance, in certain areas that Barack Obama had dominated, Donald Trump was winning. But not only was he winning at 47% or 46%, he was getting close to 50%. Now, if he was getting close to 50% somewhere, let's call it Orlando, that area where Disney World is, that was going to translate nationwide. And once those Florida results came in, I figured he was going to get elected on election night.
And Sam, moving forward to 2020 and the fact that then President Trump took the extraordinary, unprecedented step of denying that he had lost an election which he had clearly lost. To what extent was that denialism key to him then being able to make a successful comeback last year, still saying I never lost before.
In fact, I think that actually hurt his standing in the party. And even though he controlled the party to a large extent in terms of the primaries, because he was able to do an endorsement in a 5-person field or a 3-person field, and that endorsement could win that candidate the primary, those candidates ended up losing in the midterms. What I think helped him keep control of the party was one, his successor Biden's failed record. That started at around the Afghanistan withdrawal. That's when you heard some sentiments from people that within conservative media, conservative activists, that stopped talking about January 6th and how disgusted they were by his actions, and started saying, started remembering again that there were positive attributes about him when he was in the Oval Office as president and commander in chief. But at the end of the day, he's a much better candidate nationally as a challenger as opposed to an incumbent. And the facts on the ground were just better for him. And I think he learned a lot of lessons. The same way I see that he's a much better president this term than he was his first term. And it's incomparable, 2017, his performance now to compare to his performance now, it's night and day. He became a much better candidate as well. Became a much better candidate. I think losing the election in 2020 made him a much better candidate. It made him a much better president, frankly.
And from the golden escalator to the MAGA Mecca, that's going to be the Trump Presidential Library. Yes, a potential site has reportedly already been earmarked in Florida for it. So what are these legacy centres exactly, and who pays for them? Here's Melina Wicks with the briefing room.
Trump's presidential library is amassing riches from the $400 million Qatari plane we're told will eventually end up there, to the settlement money from his various lawsuits. I don't know why Trump cares so much. The last place he stored his official documents seemed fine. But what exactly is a presidential library? In 1938, Franklin Roosevelt decided to build a library to house his presidential records and donate it to the National Archives. In 1955, Congress passed a law saying every future president should do the same. These days, presidents don't just build libraries, but grand museums that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. They keep some weird stuff there.
FDR's library has this 8-foot-tall Roosevelt-faced Sphinx. And where's that retractable toothpick when you need one? Just head to Lyndon Johnson's library. And in Bill Clinton's collection, an Elvis Presley wall clock with legs that swivel in time.
I wouldn't even be excited to find that at a garage sale. Critics say presidential libraries have strayed far from their original mission. The Reagan Library houses notable exhibits like a retired Air Force One plane, a gift shop that sells toys of the plane, cute, and a pub from Ireland that Reagan visited once, which was pulled apart, shipped across the world, reconstructed in the museum, and now sells snacks. But their most popular temporary exhibit? Treasures of the Walt Disney Archives. You know, from that time Mickey funneled money to the Contras. Meanwhile, Reagan's actual presidential archives won't be fully open for 100 years. Same for the 2 Bush presidents and President Clinton, which was supposed to be the whole point of presidential libraries in the first place. These libraries aren't just questionable for what they are, but also how they're paid for. The public pay to maintain the official archives, but the buildings are paid for by private donors. Presidents are not just allowed, but encouraged to solicit money during their presidency, creating a major corruption loophole. These concerns aren't just theoretical. Bill Clinton received $450,000 in donations for his library from the ex-wife of billionaire fugitive Mark Rich, before controversially deciding to pardon him. And despite it being illegal for foreign individuals or governments to give money to a presidential campaign, they can give as much as they want to presidential libraries. And they don't even have to declare it. The presidential library system is expensive, often accused of whitewashing the presidents they memorialize, and blatantly open to corruption. But it is worth it to preserve the most important parts of American history.
An Elvis Presley wall clock with legs that swivel in time.
And that is it for Planet America's Weekend Edition. We'll be back on Wednesday night on ABC TV at 9:25 p.m. or from 9 p.m. on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook.
And we're going to have another Weekend Edition next Friday at 8 Eastern on ABC News. And there's even more on the Pep Podcast and all the best pod places. I'll see you there.
Bye-bye.